back to Zero Production Value Movie Reviews. As always, I am Eric Hernke. And today, I'm going to be discussing the 1980 horror slasher classic, Friday the 13th, directed by Sean S. Cunningham. That's right. Friday the 13th, Part 1. And I finally have a theme shirt that actually works for the movie I'm talking about. Now, I don't know how many people have actually seen the original. I think people have seen Friday the 13th here and there. And actually, I think it's probably become less as the series... It had like a one movie reboot, but really the last of the original series was back, you know, like a ways back. So it's probably kind of dying out of living memory. But for a while, this was one of the franchises. And I think people kind of always saw like the middle or the end movies, but the early movies were kind of not watched as much. So for being a cheesy, low-budget slasher film, it is amazing to think that this launched one of the most prolific and enduring franchises of all time. I didn't look it up, but I think it's something at 11 to 13 movies, and who knows how much money, especially considering the budgets of these films. The percentage that they probably raked in is, you know, right up there with a lot of huge blockbusters. And even in these humble beginnings, you can see the template for this slasher film take place. A template that would be duplicated and parodied ad nauseum if you isolate a young, pretty group of teenagers and probably make them horny and amorous and having sex, and then they all get killed. That's essentially paying homage to the template that this movie, you know, devised, or at least made probably the most famous. So back then, this was one of really a triumvirate of slasher film series, along with Halloween and A Nightmare on Elm Street. All those films really blew up throughout the 80s. They all had their distinct mythology and templates, though. They didn't really, none of them really crossed each other's, you know, they weren't doing the same thing. Now, as we know, the most famous thing about Friday the 13th is, in fact, the hockey mask wearing, machete wielding, supernatural psycho killer, Jason Voorhees. Even without movies coming out very recently, he is still a very iconic and enduring figure in the movie villain landscape. But as Scream informs us, and more people probably know it from Scream than actually having seen the film, is that Jason is not actually the original killer. It is in fact Jason's mom. In the original incarnation, Jason is used as victim, and Mom is more like avenging angel. She is crazy, but not without cause. Not sure when the decision was actually made to use Jason, but it was turned out to be fairly smart and definitely lucrative. I think because of how they ended the movie, they added like a stinger where Jason came up out of the water as kind of a last kind of gotcha moment, which the author or which the writer never really intended, and then that combined with the box office success on a relatively low budget film, and also the fact that they very convincingly killed the mom at the end of the movie. If they were going to continue this as a series, they needed another, you know, slasher and something that made sense. So it was probably only natural to pivot to Jason as a killer. So the plot centers around a group of young people who are going to Camp Crystal Lake, which has been shuttered for 20 years. Tragedy occurred there 20 years ago. 2 camp counselors were murdered. The camp was shut down, and now it's being reopened. And one by one, as these characters arrive, They are stalked, hunted, and killed in somewhat creative ways. Jason, back then, as a child, was neglected and allowed to drown by the camp counselors who were supposed to be watching over him. And the mom took her revenge then, and she continues to take revenge for her lost son. Outside of a very young Kevin Bacon, no other really famous actor or actress comes out of this. That being said, Betsy Palmer probably does the best acting job out of everybody as the crazy Mrs. Voorhees. She really, if you look at it, it's really kind of a reverse Norman Bates role, where Norman Bates was the man possessed with his mother. She, this is the mother possessed with the son, really. They did a really interesting POV style. It was an interesting way to do the killer. Like, a killer was always POV, so you never saw the killer, and it allowed some additional suspense and a more visceral nature, and it also allowed them to keep the identity of the killer a secret until the very end. It's kind of a reveal. And it probably was a reveal, as the killer was a woman. And even back in the 80s, I don't think it's a very obvious thing to make, the killer of a slasher film a woman. I mean, you really just don't see that very much, even since then. The violence is probably quaint by today's standards. I'm sure there were shouts and cries that it was too violent yesterday, but everything's always the new violent. As we know, violence would just ramp up, blood and gore would ramp up as the years go on. Considering the era and the budget, though, it's actually pretty good this. And I would be remiss to not point out that probably the next most famous thing out of this movie, outside of Jason himself, out of the franchise, is the music. And most explicitly that very specific theme, which is the right, that simulates the killer and immediately kind of gives you the willies. And it was funny because I was reading and I never really heard this, like the actual, I'm sure everybody thinks they know what it says, but the actual way it was written down was K-I-K-I-K-I and then M-A-M-A, like and that is a play on what the mother kind of utters when she channels Jason, which is, kill him, mommy, kill him, mommy, kill him, mommy. And the composer took that and took the K-I and the ma and kind of devised this with kind of a Jaws mentality in mind, and how that theme evoked the shark and this theme would evoke their killer. So it's actually kind of brilliant. They also use music pretty interestingly since they don't see the killer, the music is really the stand-in for the killer, and they only kind of use the music to represent the killer. And also that allows them to ratchet up tension or dispel it, and then kind of just jump you with you get expectations or lack of expectations due to the music being present or not being present, and then they can get one up on you. So while kind of simple, I found watching the original Friday the 13th fascinating. It was extremely interesting to digest and delve the origins of this iconic franchise. And sure, like I said, the blood and gore isn't up there, but the template is already solidly in place. And sometimes it's interesting to go back and visit this more quaint, escapist kind of horror movie, completely devoid of commentary, and you can just enjoy it on that level. So for all that, I'm going to give the original Friday the 13th from 1980, directed by Sean S. Cunningham, a B. Love you, appreciate you. Thanks for watching my review. I enjoyed making it. As always, I am Eric Hernke at Rhymes with Turnkey. Like, subscribe, leave comments. As always, this has been a production of Zero Value.